She had great faith. She truly believes that there's an afterlife, that she'll be wonderfully received in the arms of a loving God, and therefore did not fear death. And as a result of her soul being comforted on the deathbed, my soul is comforted.
Former President George W. Bush there paying tribute this morning to his remarkable mother. Barbara Bush passed away yesterday at the age of 92. She was home in Houston, surrounded by family, including her husband of 73 years, the former President George H.W. Bush. Only Abigail Adams is her peer in history, both the wife of a president and the mother of a president. But to stop there would be grossly unfair. She was blunt, yes, but also side-splitting funny. Feisty and confident in public, yet someone not afraid to acknowledge deep bouts of depression, and who said she best coped with that by pouring herself into charitable causes, like her commitment over the decades to literacy programs. In her 1994 memoir, Barbara Bush wrote this of the man with us today to share some memories. "There is no finer man, American, or friend." And we also love his wife, Alma. The former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, is with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on this day. I want to start at the very beginning, because you write in your book about your first conversation with Barbara Bush. Maybe you'd seen her around the White House. You were general then. He was vice president. Barbara Bush and you were at a reception, I believe, at the French embassy.
We were at the French embassy, and it was shortly after I became deputy national security advisor, and I'd only been in the White House for a few weeks. So she's sitting next to me at the head table, and I'm very, moved by this. And I said, "Well, very pleased to be with you today, Mrs. Bush." And she said, "Don't call me Mrs. Bush. Ma'am, don't call me ma'am." "I have to call you Mrs. Bush." "No, call me Barbara." I said, "Ma'am, I can't do that. I mean, Mrs. whatever your name is, I can't do that. It's not appropriate." She said, "Call me Barbara." And I said, "If I did that, my mother would kill me." And she said, "If you don't, I will kill you." So, yes, Barbara, I got it. And that was the beginning of a precious relationship until her passing, with not only her, but of course the president himself, and with the whole family.
Right. We met, I'll stipulate for this meeting, it was 2 weeks ago when you were still a general. It's a little longer than that, but explain this to me, because you're a general then, George H.W. Bush's vice president, then president, and you become friends.
Yep.
You read their books, you read your books, you see this friendship. You're from different sides of the tracks, if you will. Your upbringings are very different. It's not common. It's not common for people to become friends like that. Why?
We did become friends, first of all, when I was national security advisor in the last 2 years of the Reagan administration. My office and then Vice President Bush's office were separated by a bathroom that we both shared. When you share a bathroom with somebody else for 2 years, you get a little closer. But seriously, he's just that kind of guy. He was and is just that kind of guy. And we became very close. The family became very close. And one story that is most important of all for me was 2 days after he lost the election in November of 1992. I called him to just share the moment with him and tell him how I was feeling. And he said, "Thank you very much, Colin." And we talked for just about 5 minutes. I hung up, and an hour later my wife calls me and said, "Barbara just called." I said, "About what?" "They want us to come up to Camp David this weekend." I said, "This weekend? After what just happened?" "Yes." And I said, "But aren't they going to be with family and others?" "No, they want us." And so, of course, we said yes. And then she called back an hour later. Barbara said, "Bring the kids." So all my kids weren't available, but the rest of us, 2 of them were. We went. And it was a wonderful, wonderful evening. And we watched movies, and we didn't talk a lot. But late in the evening, the president wanted to take a walk through the woods around Camp David. And I said, of course, and we were walking, the president and me in front, and Alma and Barbara behind us. And I'm not asking him anything, not saying anything. He just turns to me and he says, "It really hurt." I said, "Mr. President, I know." But you could tell that the strength in that family and the strength that he had came from Barbara. She was that kind of a person. She was always there. She was always steadfast. She was a grand, grand woman.
And she said at the end of that, you write in your book, explaining as you were leaving, that they wanted to be with real friends.
Yes.
Define what real friends meant to Barbara Bush.
Real friends is somebody you can be totally comfortable with, and somebody who is not there to take advantage of you in any way. And she and Alma, my wife, hit it off. I hit it off with the president, hit it off with her. And over the years, we stayed together. And after he was out and I was out, we actually went on cruises together in the Aegean, 2 summers. And I met all the kids and grandkids and cousins and whatnot. And it was always fun to be on that ship, private ship, and watch her being what we called the Earth Mother, in charge of everybody.
Earth Mother's funny. I want to put on the screen, this is a 21st century version, but a word cloud. What I was struck by last night in reading all these statements coming in from presidents and former first ladies and leaders on Capitol Hill, we live in a time where the coarseness of our public conversation is not very healthy. And Barbara Bush could be feisty. She could be fiercely loyal to her family. She could stir up controversy. But you see family, country, loving, exceptional, advocate, dedicated, remarkable. How have we lost that? Or maybe the better question is, how did she manage that and navigate that where, yes, she said some things that were controversial. Yes, she was fiercely defensive, loyal to her family and fought for her family. But nobody thought of her as a jerk. And in today's age, forgive me, that's a term we hear too often.
That was just who she was. It was her personality. And it was a relationship she had, frankly, with her husband and with her family. She was dedicated to America. She was dedicated to family. And she treasured friends. And I saw that so many different ways over the years. And she was so, in a certain way, humble. I remember when she was coming into the office now of the First Lady of the United States, some press person asked her, well, who will be doing your dressing for you, reflecting, Nancy Reagan's designers. And her answer simply was, nobody, I have my own clothes and I'll be bringing them with me. How could you not love that? How could you not love something like that? And that's who she was. She was down to earth, she was honest, she was a great lady, and she stood up for her husband. And if you ever said anything about her husband that she didn't like, you would hear about it. Fortunately, that was never my problem. And so it was a friendship that continued to the day she passed away and continues with the president.
Well, to that point, I want you to listen to her son, President George W. Bush, talking about what his Laura Bush, I believe, gets him to the right word, debate with Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Mother and I, we occasionally would not argue, we just had
debate.
Debate.
That's a good word.
Different opinions. And we were having a theological discussion, and I was basically saying what the New Testament said about going to heaven, and Mother said, what about her friend, Mustafa? And I don't know, and we went back and forth. So she decided, I'm going to call Billy Graham. And he finally said, look, you two, I agree with the New Testament, but I want to remind you two, you don't get to play God.
There you go.
Pretty good lesson for today, by the way.
We saw this in the Bill Clinton-Hillary Clinton relationship, and I think it existed in the George H.W. Bush-Barbara Bush relationship perhaps just as much, if not more so. It just wasn't so public.
Yeah.
And some people reacted with horror when Barbara Bush spoke out, like women weren't supposed to do that, the spouse wasn't supposed to do that. She was ahead of her time in some ways there. But take us, you worked in the White House, you knew the vice president, the president very well. Was she someone who intervened in policy matters? Was she someone who, you said he was loyal to him, enforced, if somebody did something that ran afoul of him, she enforced it?
To let you know, but she did not insert herself into the daily policy issues that came along. She was always a presence. And if you got in a debate with her, you should know at the beginning that she's going to win it. There's no debate about that. And she was a steel rod in the president. She was the president's strongest supporter. But she didn't need to shout and scream and go on television and say things that might cause a problem within the administration. So in my 2 years of working there, she was always a presence. We always knew what she thought. But we also knew that she was there to make life easier for her husband and her sons and the rest of the family.
What don't we know about her? What don't we know about her? You spent time in Kennebunkport. We have some video of her putting your Medal of Freedom around your neck where the president had to offer his glasses up because she was having some issues with it. What don't we know about her that only a friend would know?
I don't know if it's, you don't know about it yet, and I'm a friend and I have something I probably won't tell you. But there's no secret to her. She is what she is. She was forthright. She believed in everything. She believed in her faith. She believed in her family. Everything was about the family and the country. And that's who she was.
Did she moderate him? You hear from time to time that she may have disagreed with him on abortion rights, or she would get mad sometimes about the language in politics.
You can be sure that she would moderate him. But you can be sure that she mostly did it when they were alone together. There was one wonderful clip on one of the television shows where they're walking in Kennebunkport, and he reaches over with his leg and kind of kicks her in the, not quite the behind, and she reaches over and pinches him. That's who they were. They were normal people who had no egos. One thing I'll always remember is after Desert Storm, when the country was so proud of what our troops had accomplished, and we were going to have this parade in New York, and then a parade in Washington. The parade in New York, the president said, "I'm not coming." "Sir, you're not coming?" He said, "No, this is for the soldiers, the troops. You go, Schwarzkopf goes, Cheney goes. This is for you." So he had a selflessness about him that she shared. And it was always commit totally to family, totally to country. And I never had a fight with her. Sometimes she would kind of look at me with a little stare that I knew exactly what it meant. But it was always the closest of relationships. And the first day I became Deputy National Security Advisor, and I'm in this little tiny office in the West Wing, and I hear this loud noise coming down the hallway. "Is he in? Is he in? I want to talk to him. Is he in?" And suddenly the Vice President of the United States walks to my office, and I almost fall over as I stand up to get to him. And that was the beginning of a treasured friendship between me, the President, and the First Lady at that time. When the term was over and he was about to take over, the day after he came to the White House after the election, the first time when he won, he called me in and offered me several jobs in the new his new administration. And I wanted to go back to the Army, and that's what I told him. But just for him to think about me at that point in his career when he was just taking over the presidency, it shows you the kind of person he was. The kind of person he was. He would kid a lot, had a lot of funny things happen in that Oval Office that I would not share, couldn't remember. But the two of them were just, I think, wonderful, not so unique, but wonderful people that really reflected the American spirit, really reflected American loyalty to each other and to the country, and really reflected the best tributes and instincts of the American people.
Examples we could use in the current discourse. You're here to talk about Barbara Bush, but it would be a crime against journalism if I didn't ask you a couple questions about current events. I know you don't want to get into the weeds of it, but Mike Pompeo was the nominee to be Secretary of State. He says he called every former living Secretary of State, which includes you. He just also had a secret meeting with the leader of North Korea. From that conversation, what were your impressions?
I had called him when he first was announced, and then we have had two other conversations, and I had a dinner with him where we talked about issues. In many of the issues, we probably have different points of view. But what I liked about my discussions with him is that he listened carefully, and I think he's taking aboard what I told him, which was very often in opposition to the position he might take. So I think we have somebody who is amenable to changes in his past positions, and we'll see. With respect to his conversation with Kim Jong-un, since I know nothing about that, I wouldn't even speculate what they talked about or what comes next.
You think a summit's a good idea, at least trying to talk it out? And I ask that for someone who tells a hilarious but very important story about being with Ronald Reagan across from Gorbachev. And when you tell this story, it's funny, but it's also not funny, about your Army training. And Gorbachev makes it known he's going to let the Soviet Union dissolve. And you're thinking, what?
Yeah.
My training is all based on this.
That's right.
So do you have this meeting with Kim? Do you have any reason to believe that, like a Gorbachev, he could be willing to walk away from his grandfather and his father's history?
I'd be surprised if he walked away from 69 or 70 years of Kim family occupancy of the leadership of North Korea.
Regime based on cruelty to its own people, belligerence to the world.
Whatever it's based on, it's been 70 years. And the only thing that really counts to him is the survival of that regime. And so I think it's good to talk rather than threaten bombing each other. I don't think there is a basis for worrying too much about North Korean bombing, because they're not going to commit suicide, which is what they'd be doing, and they'd lose the regime. But I think talking is always useful. Whether it ought to start with a summit or start at a lower level, I'll let others decide that one. I would start it at a more modest level. But I think the Director of Central Intelligence going over there was a good way to get this started.
Colin Powell, former Secretary of State. General, appreciate your time. Really grateful on this day.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for coming in.